Hi, I'm Michael Wyetzner, and I've been an architect in New York City for over 35 years. Today we're going to look at the details that make the Chrysler Building an iconic New York skyscraper. The Chrysler Building was completed in 1930 and defines the modern skyscraper and the New York City skyline. Look at any photo of the skyline of New York and you'll right away see the World Trade Center, the Empire State Building, and of course the Chrysler Building. Let's take a look at the entire building from top to bottom. So here's a photo of pre-war New York City, and you could see the Chrysler Building prominently in it. So here's everything that jumps out at me. Right away, you could see the colossal grandeur of these skyscrapers and how they tower over the existing tenement buildings that you see below here that are 6, 7 stories tall. The other thing you see is that they all have this sort of wedding cake base based on the setback zoning rules. And the purpose of this setback law was to let sunlight penetrate down to the street. And the other thing they all have are these ornate tops. And you could see the sun glinting off of the ornate crown of the Chrysler Building, which is made out of stainless steel. And you could see in this photo that it clearly is much taller than all of the other skyscrapers surrounding it. Walter Chrysler, who ran Chrysler Motors, who this building was built for, wanted it to be the tallest building in the world. And it holds the distinction of being the tallest building in the world for the shortest amount of time, 11 months, until the Empire State Building was completed. So the general rules of the skyscraper were sort of set down by Louis Sullivan, who was part of the firm of Adler and Sullivan in Chicago. And those rules were based on a Greek column, which has a base, a shaft, and a capital. Sullivan designed a number of what were considered skyscrapers back then, but basically they were about 15, 16 stories tall. He created the Wainwright Building in St. Louis, the Prudential Building in Buffalo, the Bayard Building here in New York on Bleecker Street, and the Chicago Auditorium in Chicago, which has a tower component. The Chrysler Building, along with a lot of the other buildings in this photo, are basically composed of a base, a shaft, and then an ornate capital at the top. And those rules were generally followed up until 1952, when Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill built the Lever House, the iconic modernist skyscraper along Park Avenue. The other thing that defines the skyscraper is it can't exist without 3 things: the invention of high-strength steel, the invention of the safety elevator, the invention of the subway. Because before the subway, there weren't enough people in the surrounding area to actually fill the building. So the skyscraper was born as an outgrowth of the Industrial Revolution. So elevators had been around for a while, but before the safety elevator, there was the danger that they could plummet and kill everybody within them. Because what the safety elevator did was it employed a set of brakes. So in case there was a malfunction and the car started to plummet down the shaft, a set of brakes would pop out like this and lock it in place so that it couldn't fall down the shaft. This gave people comfort, knowing that they could go up many, many stories and still feel safe. So let's zoom in a little and take a look at the influences that the Chrysler company had on the design of this building. Right away, you could see these setbacks that we talked about earlier. You could see the different colors of banded brick that act as ornament throughout. There's the off-white brick, there's this sort of beige brick, and there's this very dark banding of brick. And the thing I really like about this dark banding of brick, especially on these rows, is that working in concert with the voids of the windows, it sort of dematerializes the window, and all you read are these white squares of bricks running around the building. You can also see some elements of the car or the automobile specifically, especially right here. These appear to be tires with hubcaps in the center, and this appears to be a fender, all made out of brick that sort of wraps around those tires. And then these gargoyle-like pieces, which are made out of stainless steel, are exact replicas blown up in scale of the radiator caps that were found on Chrysler automobiles at the time. And they had to be custom made on site on the 65th and 66th floors. They set up workshops where they could actually measure and then fabricate on site all of these metal ornaments, including these lotus blossoms, which could be found on the lower setback shown on the corners here. The stainless steel sunburst crown was also fabricated on site in the building and then raised into place. So this is a photograph of the famous iconic crown of the Chrysler Building. And the crown is basically composed of these metal stainless steel arches that are concentric that rise up the building on all 4 sides. And within these are actually triangular windows that give it this sunburst pattern. And the thing I love about this photo is that you could see the actual sheets of stainless steel and the joints between them. And you could see this arched form that the crown springs from. And within that arched form, you could see this arched window which is bifurcated and has these vertical stripes on the brick spandrels between the windows. And at the corners, it has this horizontal banding of darker brick. And that runs all the way down. And then as the building expands further, you could see it has these sort of tapered recess of the spandrels, giving it this somewhat trapezoidal, Egyptoid feel. And the spire itself, which you could see here, was raised in secret at the last minute, sort of this dramatic reveal. And that's what made it the tallest building in the world. So unlike the Empire State Building, whose spire was intended to be a docking station for dirigibles and zeppelins, this one on the Chrysler Building was purely decorative and was intended just to make it the tallest building in the world. So although this building was very unique, it's also of its time, and that time was Art Deco. So let's take a look where we can see those influences on the building. So looking at this photo, there's a few things that jump right out at me immediately. One is that they set the spandrels and the windows back so that the verticals of these bricks reads as columns and give it this vertical look. And then these read as voids. And within these voids, you could see sunbursts again of this nice metalwork that sit at the spandrels between the windows. And a spandrel is just the horizontal piece that sits between two vertical windows. And the other thing that you could see is there's this horizontal line that ties the whole building together, this square pattern that's made using darker brick, and then again, horizontal lines. And you could see these chevrons, which are very reminiscent of Native American patterning, which was very common in Art Deco. So the term Art Deco comes from the International Exposition of Decorative Arts and Modern Industries, which was held in Paris in 1925. And was essentially a World's Fair. And that's the first place where some of these styles were first exhibited. It wasn't until the book Art Deco of the 20s and 30s was published in 1968 that the term came to define the movement. And there were many other famous designers who worked in the Art Deco style. Raymond Hood, the designer of the McGraw-Hill Building and Rockefeller Center, and Raymond Loewy, a famous industrial designer who was all about movement and streamlining. And that worked perfectly with the Chrysler Building and the automobile and movement. Another element of Art Deco is this sort of repeating motif, this sort of pleated repetition of form. You could see it here on the wings on the radiator cap ornament. But it's also repeated elsewhere on light fixtures. And another great example of it is the interior of Radio City Music Hall, where the curved form of the proscenium radiates out and forms the walls and ceiling of the interior. Let's look at one of the entrances where you could see further Art Deco details. So what jumps out at me immediately is how the top of this huge window above the front door is actually tapered just like at the top of the building before the crown. And that is outlined again here in this dark stone trim, which is against the limestone. So the building is essentially brick, except for the bottom 2 stories, which are made out of limestone and black granite. And then the stainless steel, which we saw at the top, is repeated into the entrance, and that idea of pleating and repetition you could see to the side of both doors. And you could see that these diagonals are basically mirroring the tapering at the top, and then the leftover piece is this very interesting sort of lightning bolt pattern, which is very reminiscent of a Native American design. And the glass itself is this translucent yellow glass that makes the whole building glow. And you could see some of the stone from the interior of the lobby coming out to the sidewalk. So let's go inside and take a look there. When you look at the interior, you see this beautiful red Moroccan marble floor and the walls as well in this book-matched pattern. And then the other thing I love is that what leads to the elevator lobbies is this gold leaf ceiling with these very small downlights in it. But at the lintel to that elevator lobby, they do this repetition of lights. So the light is integral of the decoration. And there's this beautiful mural painted on the ceiling in this very ornate pattern. So what I love about these lights is that they're actually on the wall and they're not on the ceiling, so that it actually highlights the ceiling and the mural that's there. And if one looks at the elevator doors, you can see this beautiful inlaid wood patterning that make this beautiful design. So Art Deco grew out of the Art Nouveau and Vienna Secessionist style, and one of its first examples is the Theatre des Champs-Élysées in Paris. Art Deco is not just an architectural style, but it also encompasses product design, the design of locomotives and automobiles, and even fonts and typefaces. so that it's almost a total design. This whole design aesthetic was also very popular with movie palaces of the era, because as movies became very successful, the original movie palaces used Art Deco because that was the style of the time. So let's take a look at how this Chrysler Building looks today in the New York City skyline. And the thing that jumps out at me, especially compared to that very first photo we looked at, is how many other buildings have grown up around it. So what I'm amazed by in this photo is how well the Chrysler Building still stands up almost 100 years later. And you can see the more muscular Empire State Building in the background compared to the more streamlined Chrysler Building here in the middle ground. And you could also see all the way to the left, One World Trade Center. You could see what was the Pan Am Building and is now known as the MetLife Building by Walter Gropius, and you could see the more recent Vanderbilt Place. A common complaint of these more modern skyscrapers is that they don't have the flair or the ornamentation or the great iconic crowns of the Art Deco skyscrapers from the 30s. Most people consider the Chrysler Building to be the peak of Art Deco design. And the reason it's still so iconic and stands out along the New York skyline is that famous crown with the sunburst pattern and the stainless steel. It's still such a distinct presence on the New York City skyline. So those are some of the architectural details that make the Chrysler Building an outstanding part of the New York City skyline. Let me know what other iconic buildings you'd like to see broken down in the comments below.